few years ago, I invested hundreds of pounds in a dead camera system. Launched back in 2010 and only lasting 5 years, the Samsung NX family of mirrorless cameras is now largely forgotten. Admittedly, when Samsung announced the development of the first in the series, the NX10, I don't remember being especially excited by the concept. And today, in 2025, with so many other options available from other great brands, choosing the NX1 may seem like a questionable decision. After all, there will be no replacement. No new lenses, no further accessories, and limited product support from Samsung. By all accounts, the system really is going nowhere.
The question is, why more than 10 years later am I still using the NX1 as one of my main cameras? After all, there is a lot of choice in the market these days, and I could choose a far more modern camera. Well, back in 2014, when the camera was launched, it really was ahead of its time. It led the pack in a whole range of different specifications. It sat at the very top of Samsung's range, and therefore was aimed at professional and semi-professional photographers. For that reason, even today in 2025, it has a specification that can give modern cameras a run for their money. It features a APS-C format backside illuminated 28.2 megapixel sensor, which again, by the standards of the day, really was groundbreaking. Today we're used to resolutions in the 20 to 30 megapixel range, but back in 2014 it really did raise a few eyebrows. It can shoot bursts of RAW files at 15 frames per second at full resolution, whilst maintaining full autofocus. It can also shoot 4K video at a range of frame rates, which again was ahead of its day. 4K is seen as standard today, and we've managed to push the boundaries up to 8K, but back in 2014 it really was leading the pack. What I'm most interested to find out is, can the flagship of a long dead system still be a competitor in 2025? Although it does everything I want it to, and it really does work in a whole range of different shooting situations. I use it from travel photography to landscapes to editorial work for magazines, so it fits my style of shooting perfectly. But can it really be a match for the likes of the Canon EOS R7? Well, that's what I'm going to try and find out today.
One of the most noticeable aspects of the NX1's design is how similar it is to a digital SLR. This is of course by no means a coincidence, as mirrorless cameras were still largely in their infancy back at launch, with most professional photographers still preferring to shoot with the more established camera type. As a photographer whose passion for the medium was forged in the so-called golden age of the digital single-lens reflex camera, perhaps the most attractive aspect of the NX1's design is this SLR-style handling. The deeply sculpted hand grip allows you to confidently handle the camera with larger lenses, which is something I always miss when using shallower mirrorless bodies. The NX1 itself has a very curvy design, almost eliminating straight lines completely. This makes handling it for long shoots very comfortable, more so than many Sony Alpha cameras, which can be quite boxy, at least in my opinion. All of the buttons and controls are easy to find with your eye to the camera, and are conveniently laid out across the body. Everything just feels logically placed, and I fell right into step with it from the beginning.
Being aimed at professional and semi-professional photographers, the NX1 features an impressive build quality. It mostly uses magnesium alloy in the construction, which is seen amongst the very best cameras today. As soon as you pick it up, it really does exude the professional feel, which I appreciate. The thing that you notice most when you look at it compared to some other mirrorless cameras is how like a DSLR it is, and I think that's one of the aspects that I appreciate the most. I got into photography in the heyday of the DSLR era, so anything that looks and works like a DSLR I feel very comfortable with. The camera features a really nice textured material across the body, which makes using it really easy. At no point do I ever feel like I'm about to drop it, even when using heavy lenses and when working one-handed. It makes shooting events and shooting in difficult conditions, even when using gloved hands in cold weather, that much easier. The dials also have this knurly feel, so you can easily turn them with or without gloves on, which I found to be a huge advantage when shooting out in the winter months. Not everyone liked it, but I am a fan of the dual control design of the secondary mode dial, with dedicated buttons for AF mode, ISO, metering, and white balance on top, and a rotating selector dial for drive mode underneath. Maybe having ISO selectable from the right side of the camera body, where you have the controls for the other shooting settings, may have made more sense, but to be honest, I've never really found that slows me down much.
Speaking more generally, the design of the rear and top plate of the camera takes some cues from the GX series of Samsung DSLRs, which were in turn based around the Pentax K20D. At that time, Samsung had an ongoing partnership with Pentax, whereby they benefited from the photography icon's design legacy, and Pentax enjoyed Samsung's digital expertise. Having used the camera for several years now, I've often wished for more custom function buttons spread across the camera body. There is only one dedicated function button, located on the back directly above the main scroll wheel, and it would have been nice to have a second one between the hand grip and the lens mount that could be accessed using the middle finger.
Speaking of the top plate, one of the things I love most about the NX1 is something that's missing on a lot of modern mirrorless cameras, even professional ones, and that's the top plate LCD. Although arguably not essential, I just love having a screen there with all of my shooting settings to hand, and I find that when I don't want to be noticed, so like when I'm shooting on the street and I want to be inconspicuous, I find that shooting from the hip is that much easier when you have an information screen on the top of the camera. It also means that you can quickly see what your settings are on startup. As soon as you turn the camera on, all of your settings pop up, and before you even put the camera to your eye, you're able to see whether or not your camera is ready to shoot the subject that you have in mind.
The NX1 claimed the title of the first mirrorless camera to feature a top panel LCD. The fact that Samsung felt it worthwhile shouting about this in their press material for the camera highlights the weight it used to carry amongst pro photographers. After all, it was mostly top-level cameras that featured the extra info screen. Overall, it just makes much better use of space than on some more recent camera models, in my opinion.
Although the camera is well built, it still has a very manageable weight. It only weighs in at 550 grams body only. Meanwhile, a competitor like the Canon EOS R7 weighs in at around about 612 grams, so it's not too far off, and that's despite having that magnesium alloy construction. Therefore, it's a great camera for travel. It's going to be well protected from the elements, but it's not going to weigh you down too much. Sadly, the NX1 doesn't feature a fully articulated LCD screen, although it does have this flip-out model. It's double hinged, so you can get a good range of rotation on it, which does make it more useful for low-level shooting, but it doesn't flip through 180 degrees, as many vlogging cameras do today. It's a bit of a shame, as the screen itself isn't my favourite feature of the NX1. Although its resolution matches many cameras that you get around in 2025, it just looks a little bit mushy. I don't find it the nicest screen to use of all of the cameras that I've ever had, and like I said, not being able to use it as a vlogging camera is a little bit of a downside, especially when it's packed with so many other wonderful video features.
Another disappointing feature is the lack of a secondary SD card slot. A dual slot system is expected on all new cameras at this level, especially when high-resolution videos and stills are available in-camera. Interestingly, the EOS R7 is positioned lower in Canon's range than the NX1 was in Samsung's, so it would have been nice to see that in the latter camera. Ultimately, all of the advanced features in the world don't mean anything if a camera can't use these to create high-quality images, and luckily the NX1 certainly delivers on this front.
For me, 28 megapixels represents the sweet spot for resolution. Although we can buy cameras today in excess of 60 megapixels, I rarely find a use for that. What I find is that 28 to 30 megapixels, especially on an APS-C format camera, really does provide the best balance of detail, resolution, and low light performance. Images from the NX1 are supremely detailed, not just because of the total number of pixels, but also because it's designed without an optical low pass filter over the sensor as standard. Whether or not this provides a real world difference is open to interpretation, but resolution is superb. It's very easy in 2025 to think of APS-C format sensors as inferior, partially driven by just how much more affordable full-frame cameras have become, but it's important not to overlook the advantages that the format brings. The Samsung cameras apply a 1.5 times crop to images, which might be a downside if you're shooting landscapes, but remember, if you want to shoot sports and action, which is largely what the NX1 was designed for, you're going to get much closer to your subject without having to invest in more telephoto lenses. Of course, one of the concerns of the APS-C format sensor is noise performance. A smaller sensor means smaller photosites, which means more limited light gathering capacity. Happily, this is another area where the NX1 does impress. I'm able to shoot well over ISO 1600 without much of a noise penalty. I shoot a lot of travel images, and I shoot a lot in low light, so I find that the NX1 is able to keep up with that workflow.
Dynamic range is limited by pixel size, but the camera still captures around 13 EV of detail at ISO 100, which is comparable to similar models. In terms of colour rendition, the auto-white balance system in the NX1 is also very versatile. Colours are accurate out of camera with a smooth gradation, making the camera ideal for portraiture and colourful landscape photography. Sunsets are handled beautifully in my opinion, although I sometimes find the way the NX1 captures vegetation a little bit digital in appearance. Images don't quite have that organic feel of images from Canon or Fujifilm cameras. In terms of video, the NX1 holds a special place in photographic history, being one of the very first cameras to shoot internal 4K. It was released barely 5 months after the Lumix GH4, which won the race. It can turn out a maximum resolution of 4096 by 2160 pixels at 24 frames per second. Meanwhile, 50p, 60p and 120p are available in full HD mode for slow motion capture. Video footage shares many of the qualities of stills, demonstrating superior noise and colour characteristics. The APS-C sensor allows for much better depth of field control than a smartphone, so it is ideal for shooting interviews and close-ups. Regrettably, there is no log mode available on the NX1, and I feel certain that had Samsung continued to produce the NX range, this would have been introduced in its successor. To summarise the comparison with the Canon EOS R7, a camera featuring a similar resolution, while using the APS-C format, the NX1 matches or outperforms it on several fronts. The build quality is superior, while autofocus, video features, burst rate and viewfinder quality are all very similar. Once you allow for 11 years of so-called expectation inflation, meaning the demands of consumers increase over time as technology diffuses down towards entry-level from professional-level products, you're left with a camera of outstanding longevity.
I guess the question is, can the NX1 live up to the standards of 2025? Well, the camera was years ahead of its time. It had features that wouldn't be seen again for almost another 10 years. Things like on-sensor phase detection took until the last couple of years to show up in the Panasonic Lumix range, for example. They packed the NX1 with so many features that, to be honest, it matches or even exceeds what many cameras in 2025 can achieve. The image quality is absolutely exceptional. I'm never disappointed with it. Noise performance was the big surprise, particularly when I was in Barcelona a few years ago and I was shooting in the low light of a church. Once I cranked up the ISO to ISO 6400 and above, I was expecting the images to be unusable, but far from it. Not only were they usable, but I could also brighten them in post-processing with very little worry. The camera is well built, it feels professional, the autofocus is pretty accurate, it's not quite up to 2025 standards, it doesn't have any of the clever AI tech that you've come to expect these days, but it does the job well. Auto white balance is accurate, the colours that the camera outputs are very natural, but they're also punchy. Basically, Samsung knew that if they were going to be taken seriously in the photographic industry, they had to do something different. They couldn't just pay lip service to the features people were looking for, they had to exceed those expectations. Therefore, because they were planning ahead, and because they built a camera that would have longevity, it really is a 2025 camera. The biggest shame is that the family was cut short. Sometimes I love to imagine what they would have come out with for the successor to the NX1. If this camera is anything to go by, whilst I can only speculate as to the actual specifications, I'm sure it would have been an absolute game changer. As for the NX1 itself, I hope I'm going to get many years of use out of it yet.